안녕하십니까. Good evening, viewers. Welcome to our webinar, Leveraging Big Data, AI, and Patterns for Business Growth, co-hosted by KOTRA and the Korea Society. My name is Ji-Hyung Lee, President of KOTRA North America. KOTRA is a trade promotion agency under the Korean Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy. We serve emerging Korean businesses to ensure that they have access to the global market. And KOTRA's New York IP Desk team provides institutional support to the US-bound Korean companies in their intellectual property matters. As we all know, businesses are tasked with navigating and effectively coping with regulatory uncertainties is overwhelmingly difficult, especially for a small business owner or foreign company, to find readily consumable US legislation data, regulations, and court cases, not to mention seek clarity, to offer easier access to critical information from all levels of government. FiscalNote has created patented software using big data and AI. Today, we invited Tim Hwang, CEO of FiscalNote, to share his insights in building a successful data intelligence company. Tim's vision for driving innovation and facilitating a more open and transparent society through data will be particularly enlightening during these politically tumultuous and socially volatile times. Our first session, featuring a conversation with Tim, will broadcast live from Seoul with a small number of on-site audiences. Our second session will be a lecture on patent challenge proceedings at the USPTO. To experts from Suguru Mayon PLLC will outline invalidation strategies that businesses can explore in patent dispute. This is one of the key areas that Korean businesses frequently inquire of KOTRA's IP desk. Patent infringement lawsuits place a heavy toll on emerging companies and can impede their product development process. Mike Dwanjik and Hyun-Suk Park will shed light on practical considerations while citing real case examples. KOTRA would like to thank our distinguished speakers for sharing their insightful perspectives. We also would like to thank the Korea Society for their wonderful partnership and teamwork in putting together tonight's program. Let me turn the mic to Tom Byrne, the President and the CEO of the Korea Society. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Good evening and welcome. My name is Tom Byrne, and I am the President and CEO of the Korea Society. Thank you for joining us. The Korea Society is a private, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated solely to the promotion of greater awareness, understanding, and cooperation between the people of America and Korea. The pandemic has not stopped the Korea Society from continuing to present a steady stream of online policy, education, and arts and culture programs. To the contrary, outreach in terms of audience size and geographical representation has expanded significantly. For those of you who are interested in our programs and events, I invite you to check out our podcasts, webcasts, and YouTube content at koreasociety.org. Today, we are very excited to open the discussion on big data, AI, and patents in our business world. Our first speaker is Tim Hwang, CEO of FiscalNote. Tim founded FiscalNote in 2013 to provide clients with the right policy information and AI-driven insights based on big data. In addition to being profiled in Forbes 30 Under 30 and Goldman Sachs Builders and Innovators, Tim has had quite an interesting career, working with the Obama camp during the 2008 presidential election and serving on the Montgomery County Board of Education at the age of 17. The conversation will be moderated by TaeSoo Sean Kim, a partner at Ice Miller LLP's New York office. TaeSoo is a patent attorney with extensive experience in commercial transactions and technology licensing. He advises biopharmaceutical, digital health, and technology companies, as well as startups in various stages of growth. In the second session, we are joined by two prominent patent attorneys from Washington, D.C. Michael Dwanjik is a partner at Sugru Mayan, PLLC, who has successfully represented multinational companies in patent litigation and Section 337 cases at the International Trade Commission for 30 years. Hyun-Suk Park is an associate at Sugru Mayan, whose practice includes worldwide patent prosecution, FTO analysis, and patent litigation. Mike and Hyun-Suk are true experts in handling patent challenge proceedings and devising winning and cost-effective strategies for their clients. I hope this evening's program could be inspirational and intellectually stimulating for you. This is the last of 3 webinar series in 2020 that we've partnered with KOTRA. I would like to thank KOTRA and all of their staff who have been working tirelessly to ensure the smooth operations of this year's series. We will be posting the recorded webinar through the Korea Society's and KOTRA's YouTube channels. Now let me connect you with Tim Hwang and TaeSoo Kim, who are calling in from Seoul today. Please welcome Tim and TaeSoo to our first session.
It's also for like 10 seconds. That switch. Hi everyone, this is Sean Kim from Ice Miller, joining from Seoul. It's Tim Hwang. It's good to be here. Nice to join you guys in New York. This is 8 a.m. in South Korea, and surprisingly, we had over 15 guests here in person, everyone wearing masks and observing COVID precautions. But it's good to be here to join you guys, and I just want to thank KOTRA and Korea Society for inviting us and having us hosting us. So we have an exciting topic to discuss this morning or this evening in New York. We're going to talk about leveraging big data, artificial intelligence, and patents for business growth with someone who's actually been there, done that, and is still doing that with Tim. So we're excited to be here. So let's just dive in. Tim, for people who may not know about you or FiscalNote, maybe you could share a little bit about your journey to finding FiscalNote and how you came to find FiscalNote.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's great to be here, I guess, with everyone in multiple different formats.
Yeah.
So just a little bit about myself and my background. I started off my career actually not in technology or business, but actually in politics, as you know. Sean and I actually very different sides of the political spectrum. But I started off my career in 2007. Actually, my first job was working for President Obama's 2008 presidential campaign, which was actually more of a win than anything else. And then ended up surprisingly doing pretty well in 2008, and enjoyed kind of working on the political side of the house. In 2009, I had the interesting opportunity to run for office. So I ended up running for the Board of Education in the state of Maryland. Fortunately or unfortunately, I got elected at the age of 17. Served there for one term, and very, very interesting job, essentially running the education department, in Maryland. Having gone down the political field for a couple of years, I decided to take a little bit of a break. I was 18 at the time. My parents essentially told me to go back to college, and so ended up going to Princeton, studying politics, public policy, computer science. And then was actually about to start my MBA over at Harvard, and actually dropped out to start this company. And this company, what I wanted to do was essentially build at the intersection of technology and politics, kind of the two fields that I had a lot of interest in. And one of the things that you have a lot of appreciation for when you are sitting in government is how inefficient government is. And a lot of times, the work that you're doing, spending time in government, is actually following what other people in government are actually working on, right? So if you're sitting in Congress, you're trying to follow what the regulatory agencies are doing. If you're sitting in the White House, you're trying to follow what Congress is doing. If you're sitting in the State Department and the Foreign Ministry, you're trying to follow what other governments are doing. And so you realize that the majority of time, maybe not a majority, but a lot of the time that you spend in government is just tracking everything else that everybody else is doing. So we decided to go out 2013 to build a technology company in Silicon Valley. So we moved out to Silicon Valley. We grabbed a couple of friends, we bootstrapped a couple $1,000s, and we decided to build a business going straight after the legal information market. So this is the market that was dominated by, LexisNexis, Westlaw, Bloomberg, Wolters Kluwer, and a couple other players. And we wanted to essentially build an AI-driven solution that collected legislation, statutes, regulations, court cases, government filings, government documents from as many countries as possible, and then used natural language processing, text processing, machine learning, artificial intelligence, computer vision to essentially start building some very novel applications for collecting legal information and then analyzing that legal information for our customers. So the company was founded in summer of 2013. This was actually right as I was leaving undergraduate. And then, really it took off from there. I mean, it's been about 7 years now, I guess. And, we definitely have grown quite a bit. We now service about 5,000 customers and law firms and companies. So our biggest customers are U.S. Army, U.S. military, CIA, NSA, CDC, SEC, FDA. We have big corporate clients as well. I would say about half the Fortune 500 are our customers today in their general counsel offices. And then pretty much a large portion, I would say almost 2/3 of the AmLaw 100 are our customers today. And so we've been able to obviously build a very interesting business, basically helping lawyers of all shapes and sizes across the corporate, government, and civil society and law firm segments, essentially helping them understand the laws and regulations that are relevant for their clients and for their businesses.
Right. That's amazing growth. And I still remember when we last met in 2015, you're still commuting from New York to DC almost every week. And I was pleasantly surprised to find you still do that.
Yeah, well, DC has the highest concentration of lawyers in America, and so we had to move our company from Silicon Valley to DC, the headquarters. But obviously New York is the second market, so we've been going back and forth.
Right. So thank you so much for giving us the overview of how you grew FiscalNote. Maybe you could talk a little bit about, now that you achieved where you are, you also ventured into some of the media space and with the acquisition of Roll Call, and maybe you could talk about how that process went and some of the acquisition strategies that are now driving the growth behind FiscalNote.
Yeah, so in 2018, we conducted a transaction with The Economist Group and effectively carved out some of the core government assets within The Economist. So we paid about $180 million to acquire some of the core American media assets, namely Congressional Quarterly and Roll Call. For those of you who don't know, Congressional Quarterly is probably the database of record for Washington, D.C. It's sort of like the Bloomberg for D.C., basically following legislation out of Congress. They've got direct data feeds into the congressional basement, physical wires that go into the congressional basement that pull in things like transcripts off committee hearings, amendments off of congressional markups, budget and appropriations. And then we acquired a consumer media property called Roll Call, which has actually, it's been around since about 1945, basically following political updates in Washington from right after World War II. So our business, I would see it as we are primarily an information business. So we sell information to our customers. And very similar to the way in which Bloomberg sells stock data and bond data and foreign exchange data, we sell legal data to organizations. So the first thing to do, in terms of our acquisition strategy, whether it's CQ or other acquisitions, is we are looking for businesses that have unique legal data sets that we can essentially incorporate into our technology platform. So it could be a Japanese court case product. It could be a regulatory data business out of Australia. It could be a statutory business out of Nigeria. But we're essentially pulling in multiple different data sets from around the world. The second thing is we are building our media business quite extensively. So very similar to the way in which Dow Jones has the Wall Street Journal, Thomson has Reuters, Bloomberg has Bloomberg News. We are building FiscalNote and then our news division. And in our news division, we're right now at the moment focused primarily on news, right? So political news. So what's happening in Congress, what's happening in Brussels, what's happening in Beijing, what's happening in Singapore, what's happening in all these different centers of power, and how do they impact global policy, global trade policy, global customs, tariffs. And then secondarily, we are increasingly moving into what I call secondary hard content. So outside of political content, business and economic content, and then eventually entertainment as well. So we are increasingly kind of building out that media function within our business.
Sure. So for those of you who may not know about, people who may not know about the core offering part of the FiscalNote, namely the GRM, the government relationship management system, how that works. Can you just describe about your core product and how that grew over time using artificial intelligence and big data?
Yeah, so our core business, I would divide it into kind of two categories. So number one is the data and content, and number two is the workflow software. So the data and content is primary legal documentation, right? So when lawyers look up statutes, when they look up case law, when they look up regulations, we're essentially pulling all these different documents from tens of thousands of government agencies around the world. And then we're using text processing to summarize it, structure it, classify it by industry, make it searchable, accessible, basically a legal search engine that people use on an ongoing basis, on a global basis. We pair that additionally with proprietary news and analysis and research that helps attorneys effectively navigate the practical aspects of law. So the regulatory aspects, the case law aspects, we expect this and this to be overturned as a result of the political dynamics in this particular circuit. So basically those types of analysis. And then that analysis and research gets fed into a workflow software product. Getting alerts, notifications, dashboards, reporting capabilities. We have a software module, for instance, that enables companies to log all of their interactions with regulators. So if you are a pharmaceutical company, you can actually use the software to have all of your people across the firm log every single time in a core CRM. Every time they get a call from the FDA, or every time they have to have a conversation with a drug regulator in any part of the world, you can have a centralized repository of all your regulatory filings and your interactions. So that's the sort of enterprise software capability part of our products that we built for the global Fortune 500 and then for large companies as well.
Right. And how does your AI algorithm work in layman's terms? So if you were to describe someone who doesn't know anything about artificial intelligence, how the natural language processing works, how would you describe that to a new client that you're trying to talk to about use of your product?
So our business is actually very similar to the oil business or a metals and mining business. So we're actually almost exactly the same. So our core business, we essentially have to build what we call an extraction engine. So instead of drilling in the ground for some raw resource, we partner with governments. We go into the internet. We go into government databases, and they essentially extract all of these raw resources, right? So in our case, it's billions and billions and billions of pages of text, so raw text. So that data is extremely valuable for us because we're essentially mining that. So the next portion is what I'll call cleansing. So we have to essentially clean that raw resource. So very similar to petroleum or to gold or to diamonds, we essentially have to take that raw resource. We have to clean it, we have to refine it, we have to process it. So in our case, we have to start putting metadata on top of it. So things like, this impacts this industry. It's from this regulatory agency. It impacts this particular set of companies. And then we have to send it into what we call our data pipeline. So our pipeline essentially is in the process of, it takes that refined data and it transforms it into something that's actually usable for web applications or for APIs or whatever the case is. So we essentially have to, we call it the ETL pipeline, right? Basically transforming that data to be able to make it available. And then once it's refined and once it's sent it to the pipeline, we have to make it usable for our customers, right? So if you're in the petroleum business, for instance, then it means that you have to take the gas and you have to put it in the ground and you have to let people pump it into their cars. Right. In our case, we have to build APIs, web applications, mobile applications where people can actually use that data, right? So they can actually search it, get alerts, they can basically pull that information out, generate reports. So our business is fundamentally an extraction business, a processing business, a transformation business, and then a delivery business. And all of the sort of AI, traditional AI that people talk about is in the middle of that, that layer, right? So the processing, the summarization, the classification of that text is actually done on an automated basis. And so that's all powered by artificial intelligence in our organization.
I see. So stepping back a little bit, it's very impressive that you're able to grow the company so large and you're on a tear with acquisitions and growth. But I'm sure that you've had your share of challenges along the way, from your first capital raise, which is a very interesting story of yourself, to where you got now. Can you talk about how you grew along the way in terms of your first capital raise to now and some of the challenges you face as an entrepreneur?
So this is my first company. I started this company when I was very young, when I was 21 years old, essentially.
And you're 20.
I'm 28 now. Yeah, not by Korean age, but I'm 28 in the US. but by 20,
to make all of us feel underachieved.
But yeah, so I don't come from a particularly wealthy background, family background, or anything, and so we really had to struggle to get this company started. We essentially took our summer savings, internship money, pulled it into a joint bank account with my co-founders. Is probably less than $5,000 or $6,000 that we all pulled together. And then when we were living in Silicon Valley, we couldn't afford an apartment, right? Because as many of you know, in the Valley, it's just extremely expensive. And so I think an apartment in Silicon Valley back then in 2013 was something like $3,000 or $4,000 a month to house us. We had something like $5,000 or $6,000 in our bank account. So what we had to do is we essentially were living out of a Motel 6 room, and this was we were paying something like $60 a night. 2 beds up until our 5th employee, basically. 2 guys sleeping on each bed, 1 guy sleeping on the floor, and that was our office. And we'd get up every morning, probably. We were still young back then, so we'd get up like 9 or 10. Yeah. We would pick up the phone and start calling customers, calling customers from 9 a.m. to about midnight, every single day, 7 days a week, for several months straight, and built the software, got our first customers, and started building the company. And I'd say about 6 months into the business, we started the process for raising capital. So. First round of capital actually was led by Mark Cuban, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, and basically what we did with Mark, actually, I think we got very lucky because we were watching Shark Tank one night, and I went on Google and I Googled Mark Cuban's email, and it was literally mark@axs.tv. You can still email him today, and then. He responded within 45 minutes. I pitched him our idea. He responded and he said, I'll write the first check. He wrote the first $740,000 investment into the company. And then from there, a bunch of top tier Silicon Valley venture funds, started investing. Right? So NEA, first round, Jerry Yang, the founder of Yahoo, and ended up raising about 1.3 million in that first seed round. I think at this stage, we probably returned, I want to say something like 40 or 50 times, probably a little bit higher, the investment on that side. But really, I think we've been able to scale this business, really taking that same energy from the early stage of the company and then building it over time. So after 2014, when we raised our first round, we moved the company from Silicon Valley to Washington, D.C., where all of us actually went to high school and grew up, and just aggressively started scaling the company from there, right? So, we grew the company from 3 guys on a laptop to 5 to 10 to 50 to 100 to 500 plus employees, raising. In the process, we've raised about $230 million in venture capital, from everyone from the Mark Cuban and Jerry Yangs of the world to now Temasek, Apollo, S&P Global, The Economist, SoftBank, straight down the line, who really supported the business at each stage of the process. But I would say that the business, unlike many other businesses, the unique thing about our business is that we've actually never changed our business model. So from the very, very beginning of the company, when we were sitting down and building our business plan, to almost 10 years later, we've never, ever changed our business plan. We still are collecting legal data. We're still selling it to law firms and companies. We're still processing the information. I would say that the only difference now is we have maybe slightly bigger ambitions, but nothing fundamentally, I think, has changed from when we were literally just 3 college kids trying to build a company.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And along the way, we've also noticed that you've also transitioned a little bit into Korea as well, in terms of some of the acquisitions you made here and some of the business ventures you've had. Maybe you could talk about, since we're in South Korea, maybe you talk about some of your ventures in South Korea. Yeah.
So we have 3 main offices here in Asia. We have Seoul, Gurgaon, India, and Hong Kong very recently. We are looking into opening up Singapore and Sydney fairly soon, I would say in the next 6 to 9 months. Korea is the hub of our Asia operations. We funnel a lot of our finance, legal, accounting kind of structures essentially through the Korean market, even though I guess our by people, our India office is significantly larger. Why, you ask? Well, part of that is because I'm Korean. So we can kind of define what we want to do in the company. But I think Korea has this really interesting nexus of very smart people, high levels of R&D investment, very stable political structures, relatively stable political structures that essentially enable continued and sustained investment into the market. The primary business and operation was something that we started probably about a little less than a year ago. It's a company called Data Hunt. It's a subsidiary business. And one of the things that we're doing at our company now is actually spinning out our core technologies at FiscalNote into separate horizontal technology companies. So the same technologies that we talked about in terms of the application of AI, so the text processing, classification, summarization, data labeling, categories, all these different things, we're now starting to spin out in separate subsidiaries to actually start selling that technology, not just to our legal customers, but to healthcare, e-commerce, oil and gas, telecom, financial services, straight down the line. And so Data Hunt is our first experience with this. We spun out our data labeling and text processing technologies into a separate subsidiary a couple of months ago. That business actually is doing surprisingly well. We probably have about a dozen or so enterprise customers already in the first year. And we expect that number will hopefully triple or quadruple over the course of the next couple of months or so. We're now making investments, I would say, in robotic process automation, as well as in image annotation, in computer vision capabilities that effectively will be spreading each of these offices across Korea, as well as in the US and whatnot. But Korea is the hub for our Data Hunt investment. And secondarily, we are planning on essentially investing into the Korean market as a hub for servicing the Japanese market as well. So our hope is to essentially start building out sales, marketing, and then design capabilities in the Korea office to be able to support both the Korean market and the Japanese market.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing your plans. So since we're talking about big data and we're supposed to talk about patent strategy as well, and as an attorney working with startups, oftentimes they don't fully appreciate the importance or significance of patents until they have a competitor come into the space or they get sued. And I know we talked about this and how you came to appreciate patents, and that became some of the core strategy behind FiscalNote as well. So maybe you could talk about how you came to grow the FiscalNote's patent portfolio and where you're going with the portfolio now.
Yeah, we started filing our first patents probably around Series A, Series B is really when we started to, because I think we understood that it would take several years in the U.S. patent system to be able to start getting some of these licenses. But we understood inherently that building the IP portfolio for the business was fundamental, for our business. And unlike the content space, I guess, where everything is fairly copyable, I guess. We live in sort of hard tech, and within hard tech, the ability to be able to have strategic legal defenses, especially as you get larger, we felt was extremely important to be able to build up that portfolio over time. And so the other thing that I would mention is that a patent is only as useful as its ability to be enforced. And so as we think about our own business, as we get larger, as we acquire other businesses, as we fend off early stage competitors that are coming into our market, I think increasingly we feel that the patent investment that we made very early on in our business is actually paying off now, because we can actually start to either enforce our patents or have the defensibility of enforcing those patents in the future. And then secondarily, I think as we think about licensing our technology into these horizontal businesses, that's only possible by the fact that we have the technology that we own, and then B, the ability and the opportunity to be able to license that technology into subsidiaries or into other companies as well. So I think without that initial investment, it would have been very difficult to, for instance, if we were building off open source technologies, or if we had not spent the time to be able to protect our intellectual property, it'd be very difficult to look at these second, third, fourth stages of growth beyond our core business today. So it is, I would say, particularly important for us to continue to build that portfolio, either through strategic acquisition of companies and assets, or through just continuously working with our legal office and our counsel, essentially, to continue to file those patents.
And I think you chose a great timeline, because a lot of times companies either file too early when they're not fully ready, or the technology is not prepared, or too late when they should have filed some time ago. So I think Series A stage, when you have the funds and you have the technology more mapped out, is a great time period to start building the portfolio. And you have a great insight to do that. So I guess the lesson is for a lot of startup founders out there, if you have important IP, to try to protect it early on, rather than wait too late and lose the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Especially, I would say that, I wouldn't say that, it really depends on the business, right? But I think the harder the business is from a technological perspective, you've spent millions and millions of dollars developing your technology, especially if you're in things like artificial intelligence, but even there are fields that are more significant than that, right? So biotech, hardware technologies, it doesn't make sense not, to protect that the millions of dollars of investment that people have made. But even if you're, I would say, in soft IP businesses like content or whatnot, those businesses do require strategic protection, especially in our media businesses, right? Because in our media businesses, we have a growing portion of our business that is increasingly built around licensing of the content, or distribution of information and news and the like. And so in order to have the legal right to be able to distribute that content, we essentially have to make sure that we build a defensive wall around it, so that the barriers to entry continue to go up.
Yeah, and I could tell that you're well versed in IP because the terms like soft IP are the terms that only patent attorneys and IP attorneys use. So that's great. So I think what we want to talk about is we already touched on some of your future plans for FiscalNote, but to the extent that you could share, some of the horizontal areas you're going into, or what your personal vision is for the company going forward, what you can share with the audience that might be interesting for us to hear.
Yeah, our space is really interesting. Every year, about $170 billion are spent on companies buying data, right? So I'm sure everybody knows the companies in this category: S&P, FactSet, Morningstar, IHS, Bloomberg, Thomson Reuters. Each of these companies, many of them are, $5, $10, $15 billion a year in revenue, and we're still very, very small minnow in that space. So
getting there.
Yeah, we have a pathway to get to $1 billion in revenue. My goal is to try and get there as quickly and efficiently as possible. And part of the strategy, I think, is diversification of the data sets that we sell to our customers, right? So we built a great core business in the legal space with great technologies. The idea is actually to start leveraging that technology in two ways. The first we heard about already, which is horizontal application of our technology. So we are now entering the computer vision, machine learning, text processing businesses fairly quickly. But the second actually is to get to a point where we actually leverage those technologies in other vertical areas. So we are building vertical businesses in specifically in healthcare, in oil and gas, in construction and real estate. Essentially, to start selling data to each of those sectors, whether it's property data, whether it's pricing data of drugs and pharmaceuticals, whether it's land rights and titles and deeds of individual exploration for oil and gas companies.
Sure.
We're essentially building new businesses on a constant and ongoing basis. I've told our internal teams next year that the goal is to launch up to 20 new businesses in vertical markets to start going after each of these categories, and to really keep innovating the business to get to a point where we're a diversified information business over time. So beyond that, obviously in our core legal market, we are right now not even maybe a third of the way through the entire globe in terms of collecting legal information. So we're still working our way through Latin America, through Eastern Europe, Middle East, Africa, Southeast Asia, where we're collecting more and more legal information. So my target is to essentially have every law and every regulation in every country on the planet collected, structured, digitized, and available for our customers in a global legal data business. And so that core business continues to grow. I think we're adding a new country every 2 to 4 weeks. And basically the hope is that over the course of the next couple of years, we'll continue to solidify our global position as the market leader in the legal data industry.
It's amazing. What are some of the challenges you face as you're going to, I'm sure not every country is going to open up their books to you in terms of providing you all the data that you need. So you talk about some of the challenges you face and how you overcame that as you dealt with governments of the world, whether it's our government in the US or Korean government.
Yeah, well, I think the Korean government is actually quite good relative to relative to the rest of the world. I spent some time last year before COVID in Dubai, in Riyadh, in Jordan, in Indonesia, and in Malaysia, where it's actually significantly more difficult to collect legal information out of those markets. So we have quite a large number of people basically kind of working directly with government in some of those markets. So we have close relationships with the World Economic Forum in Davos, the World Bank, the IMF, the United Nations, essentially on creating government standards, digital standards for publishing laws, statutes, regulations. We're involved in many of the working groups, essentially to publish those information sets for our customers. But I concede the point that it'll be very difficult to get information out of South Sudan, out of Congo,
North Korea.
and North Korea. Although I don't think that we're not going to stop trying, right? If it's not the core legislative or regulatory information, we'll most likely collect news information, articles, which are publicly available for many, for the world.
Sure.
I would say though that the biggest challenge for our business is not necessarily technical or product oriented. It's people oriented. And this is one of the things that I feel as a technology founder is that as you get bigger as a company, you know, particularly as you get beyond 500 or 1,000 employees, the momentum for innovation slows down a lot. And the ability to create new products, the ability to launch new markets, the ability to go after new geographies and new customer segments, that risk tolerance shrinks quite a bit because a business has an existing business that needs to defend against competitors. People have day jobs. They essentially need to keep doing their jobs around. And so proportionally, you know, when the company is 3 people, 100% of the company is focused on innovation, right? And then, you know, as you get bigger and bigger and bigger, that proportion shrinks. And then when you get to, you know, 500 or 1,000 people, you know, the proportion of people working on innovative new products actually shrinks down to, you know, 20%, 15%, 10%, 5%. And then the natural rate of innovation for the business slows down. So I think that the biggest challenge that we have as a company is pushing the wheel of momentum of innovation on an ongoing basis and be able to continue to stay relevant for our customers. And for me, I would say that that comes down to our people and how our people are compensated, how they're incentivized, how they're structured and organized, the types of people that we hire. You know, I'm making a very big push right now for the next 100, 200 employees in our company to be extremely innovative, to be kind of founders in waiting is what I call them. So basically people that can be founders, can be entrepreneurial, but, you know, want to have a little bit more of a structured environment. So that's the type of culture that we're trying to build within our company over time.
So since, you know, you touched on this fact a little bit earlier, touched on this, that Korea has become a sort of a hub for you because of some of the talent here and some of the other factors, but also, you know, something that goes into consideration is your background as a Korean American. This is hosted by Korea Society, and we're here in Seoul. And I promise you I was going to ask you questions like this. But what does it mean to be a successful Korean American founder, and how do you identify yourself, and like how do you place yourself as a Korean American entrepreneur and in the space that you're in now?
Well, I think that first of all, I don't think that we're successful yet. We have a long way to go. It's especially when you're coming from the U.S. Like I would say that we're probably still considered a small business. So we're still working our way up. But I think that there are really interesting lessons that I've learned. I talk about this publicly with some of our employees and stuff. The U.S. right now is going through some really interesting times. It's going through, I would say, a diversity revolution. So particularly because of the political movements over the last couple of months in particular around, you know, Black Lives Matter and the kind of racial protests and the like. Many companies are trying to evaluate the diversity of their workforces, diversity of their management teams, and what it means for the strengths of their business. So what I basically said from the very beginning is that diversity is a strength, especially for a business like ours that needs to be global, that needs to have good understanding of different languages and cultures and political structures. Diversity is a core fundamental strength for a business, right? So not to bad talk our competitors or whatnot, but many of our competitors, which are much larger than us, may have thousands or tens of thousands of employees that the management teams or the executive teams are all Caucasian male 50s, right? And they have no understanding of international markets, no diversity in their workforce or management teams. And it's very difficult for them to actually understand why certain countries operate a certain way, or why certain cultures operate a certain way.
Sure.
And so I think that as we built our management team, it's very diverse, both by gender and by racial aspects.
Right.
And that's enabled us to essentially draw upon a wide variety of experiences
Right.
to be able to build the international global business that we have.
Right.
So at a personal level,
Yeah.
you know, what I would personally say is that, you know, when I was in high school, I definitely felt that being Asian American,
Yeah.
being Korean American,
Sure.
I thought was a disadvantage in the market, right? So, you know, you're in the minority of the minority,
Right.
right? And there's certainly a lot of discrimination.
Sure.
Especially if you're living on the East Coast,
Right.
it's very challenging to break into certain markets,
Sure.
particularly like the legal market,
Yeah.
where, as you know,
Yeah.
the core legal market in the U.S. is extremely non-diverse.
Sure.
And so there are times when I still feel that way.
Yeah.
After we bought CQ Roll Call, for instance, I told the story to some people, but I was at a dinner in Washington, D.C., and this was with all of the owners of media properties
Sure.
in D.C., and probably about 100 people. I walk in, and I was the only Asian American in the entire room.
Right.
And it's very difficult when you're almost singled out like that. But that's just part of being in the United States and operating a
Sure.
business in the U.S.
Sure.
Is that you have to be comfortable with that.
Sure.
But I think increasingly what I find is that as we globalize our business,
Sure.
the fundamental ties that I have to Korea, to
Sure.
Asia in general, are a huge strength. And we were able to enter the Asian markets much faster than our competitors.
Sure.
We're able to develop much stronger relationships, better investment relationships, better partnerships, distribution agreements, up and down from Korea all the way down to Indonesia. You know, largely because I think we're able to leverage the relationships that we had in Korea specifically to be able to expand our business. And so I think that's been a fundamental strength for myself. My two other co-founders are also Asian American. One is Chinese American, the other is Taiwanese American. And
Sure.
we've been able to leverage their core family markets essentially
Sure.
to expand our businesses very quickly and rapidly in Asia, much faster than our competitors.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that. I when we talked about asking that question, I know we joked about it, but that was a much better answer than I think both of us expected. Great. So I think we have some time left for live question from the audience here. So for those of you who are listening at home or at work, we're going to essentially take questions from some of our live audience here. And if they ask in Korean, I'll translate into English, and Tim can answer in English. So if anyone has any questions here, don't be shy. 뭐 질문 있으시면, yeah, please.
This thing here.
Yeah.
I appreciate your
Yeah.
speech, and my question is, I understand that you're trying to expand your business to Korea, Asian countries. So, how can you overcome the language limitation to access the English? You provide English-based service. So all regulations and all the statutes in Korea are provided in Korean.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
do you have any idea to
Right.
translate efficiently from Korean to
Right.
English?
So for those of you who are listening at home, the question was a great question, I think, was how do you effectively deal with countries where if you're providing your access to your platform in English, how are you dealing with countries that don't use English, like South Korea?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It's a great question because so let me start it from a technical perspective. Machine translation is a very difficult problem in general. There's different approaches to it that are successful to different and varying degrees. I would say that on the spectrum of translation of documents, and this is of course, no offense to lawyers, but I would say that legal document translation is probably the easiest. And the reason why is because the language is so technical compared to, let's say, a Harry Potter novel. A Harry Potter novel is extremely difficult to translate. There's a lot of nuances. There's a lot of entendres. There's a lot of context behind the words,
Sure.
right? So there's, if there's a plot, for instance, that needs to get translated and there are references back to that plot. The legal and then to a lesser extent, scientific languages are extremely technical, right? So human rights are translated as human rights in German, in Korean, in Spanish, at the United Nations, at the World Trade Organization, at the IMF. They're already translated multiple times by professional translators. There's the same thing goes for scientific as well, right? So the concept of a liver is a tangible concept that can translate between a scientific English or Latin term to a Korean term to a Mandarin term, and then even the references in legal languages, there's technical languages or technical language essentially to reference back, right? So it could be a section, subsection, subsection, that references back, or specific case law that refers to a specific case on a certain year, maybe even a specific document on a specific docket. What that means is that the translation is actually significantly easier. So how we've approached it essentially is by piggybacking off of existing international legal corpus of data. So this is off of international conventions out of Geneva, information out of the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, basically existing international institutions that have already translated legal documents into several dozen languages. And then we build our own machine translation on top of that to be able to effectively translate those documents. Now, it's never going to be perfect. And I don't think that, there was always going to be challenges, but typically I would say that, let's say a topic like venue and jurisdiction, right? Venue and jurisdiction, very, very tangible legal concept that can get translated into multiple different languages. There's no ambiguity about what that exactly refers to in terms of a contract or the like. So, and then the last thing I would mention is the actual user experience. So from a user experience perspective, most of our users are extremely well versed in English, and that's largely because we sell to ExxonMobil, to Amazon, to whatever, and so their legal teams, I would say, are fairly global already. And what that essentially means is that if it's very rare where we sell to a Japanese company where not a single person in that legal department doesn't speak any English. And that's largely because of the customer segment that we've gone after. So over time, obviously, I think we'll have to continue to service smaller and smaller businesses as we get larger. But our core market right now is Global Fortune 2000 and the legal departments in that Global Fortune 2000. In many cases, we actually haven't gotten a lot of requests from our clients to get domestic in-language translation because they'd rather just have English or just the domestic documents themselves. So if you're servicing Japanese court cases, for instance, that means 9 times out of 10 that the company's already operating in Japan. They already have in-house counsel and outside counsel servicing that company or the subsidiary in Japan. And so there isn't a super high need to essentially translate Japanese and Spanish, for instance, right? So and that's partially how we've been able to keep a lot of our processing costs down in order to really make sure that we're building specific products for our customers.
Great.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Chimi Park. I'm CEO at Wearables, which is a bio startup providing a platform for individual development. And it is very interesting and impressive that you targeted your client market starting the legal industry, where it's one of the most conservative industry, as much as the clinical and then bio industry. So I have 2 questions. Number one is, did you guys have any legal counsel or legal advisory, one of your employees from
from the starting? And then next question is, would you share your experience in working on clinical data or clinical industry or future plan?
Okay. So for those in the audience on the webinar, the first question was because you're going after the legal market, which is a conservative market to start. So did you have a legal counsel as an advisor or as a team member from the beginning? And the second part was because the audience member works in the biotech industry, are you currently involved in any clinical testing in the biotech space? Yeah.
Yeah. So let me start from the second question first. So the number one market that we operate in is healthcare and pharma. It's actually it's about a quarter of our business. So it is the most heavily regulated market. It is the market that has the most significant demand for legal and regulatory information. I would say every major pharma manufacturer, as well as health insurance company, is a customer of ours in the United States. What's interesting actually for us is that I was just saying this to our employees maybe a couple weeks ago. We actually service the entire spectrum of the entire industry. So FDA, CDC, Center for Medicaid and Medicaid Services, Medicare Services, Johnson & Johnson, 3M, all within the cycle of regulatory, manufacturing, research and development, and distribution are all of our customers. And so our goal actually in the healthcare and clinical space is to actually go much deeper into the healthcare and pharma space over time. I don't think that we'll ever launch any drugs of our own. I don't think we're going to enter that side of the business, but all of the ancillary businesses associated with that, for instance, around regulatory compliance, dealing with FDA regulators around the world, market access issues, distribution issues, patent and IP related issues. We're essentially planning on building information businesses in each of those categories. Even when it comes to, for instance, marketing, pricing, manufacturing of individual drugs and products. We just launched a product about 2 years ago. In the US, drugs are not only regulated by the FDA, but they're also regulated at the state level by pharmacy boards, in some cases by local pharmacy boards as well, that regulate, for instance, the price, the time, the amount that can be sold at specific jurisdictions. And so we actually built a product specifically helping companies in that category with market access issues. That's a business that we are continuing to grow and scale on our side of the house. In the first question, the legal industry, I would say is very conservative for sure. But I see that actually more as an opportunity because once you're in, the barriers to entry and the defensive capability to stay lodged in as a key vendor is very, very high. So unlike other categories and software categories, I don't see dozens of competitors popping up in our space all the time, right? It's usually one or two competitors that we see kind of coming up here and there. We can monitor all of them on a pretty close basis. But the ones that do have breakout velocity in our category actually are extremely successful. And so we spent a lot of time building core relationships, with the Bank of Americas and the Facebooks and the Skadens and and the Perkins and whatnots of the world, basically trying to build core customer relationships that we can scale over time. I'd say the second thing is in the early stages, I obviously had a political background, so building or writing legislation and looking at statutes actually wasn't that difficult. But we did build, I would say, a pretty extensive advisory board in our company. So we brought on folks like Alec Ross, who is a secretary of Hillary Clinton's chief innovation officer, the State Department. We brought on Chris Liu, who I'd worked with, who was Senator Obama's chief of staff. We brought on Glenn Hubbard, who was President Bush's chief economic advisor. So basically folks that I had basically in my network to kind of help and support the business in a variety of different contexts. And so getting into most of the law firms actually wasn't super difficult. So it wasn't difficult to get into, Whiting case or, to Kirkland or whatever. The bigger issue was getting the product right and making sure that the product was exactly what our customers needed. And the reality is that for most lawyers, LexisNexis and Westlaw are extremely bad products. They haven't innovated.
I'll say one's better than the other, but I'm
Yeah.
not gonna say which one.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, but a lot of that is because the market has gone so fat, right? Because there's no startups, because there's no innovation. Lexis and West, each of them do almost $4 billion a year in revenues. Each of them do approximately $1 billion plus or so in free cash flow. They've been doing that for over 15, 20 years. And that's a recipe for disruption, right? When R&D investment goes straight to zero and people are pumping cash flow out of products, that's a recipe for startups to come in and start innovating, because customer expectations are going to change, right? They're going to change with mobile devices, with artificial intelligence, with new workflow capabilities. And when the incumbents don't shift with the customer changing tastes and expectations, that's the fundamental shift that we have in the software space to be able to go after that market. I'll end with this. The biggest movement in our sector was 2008, 2009, because what happened was companies started realizing that they were spending way too much with outside counsel, and they started shifting the resources to in-house. And you see this actually in all the major banks, in the insurance companies, in energy companies, where the share of legal spend that goes to outside counsel has shrunk dramatically. And JP Morgan now has more lawyers than dentists, right? Like they basically have, Google is the world's largest law firm. So that means that all of the existing tools and markets that used to exist in the law firm space fundamentally shifted. And now all these lawyers that are coming into the market, 2010, 2011, 2012, were entering into the corporate market, which have drastically different expectations, right? So they have significant more expectations around software, around workflow, around collaboration, around analytics, which are very different from billing clients on an hourly basis. And that's enabled us to essentially open up a market opportunity and build a specific product for that customer segment and expand from there.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. Or maybe we'll make it, if it's a quick question, we'll make it two. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your thoughts, Tim. You mentioned the application of AI and big data into some of the most heavily regulated industries, the legal side and the healthcare side. I come from an investment background, so what other areas do you see emerging that you think there are still a lot of opportunities, the application of AI and analyzing big data?
So the question was, what other fields might be available that you are looking at or you might be looking in the future, aside from the legal and healthcare that you mentioned?
Well, I think that the biggest area that, so stepping back, in the early 2010s, the primary application of artificial intelligence was around analytics, right? So people would essentially look at, how do we visualize something better? How do we look at something better? How do we derive new insights as a result of artificial intelligence? I think that has shifted fundamentally in the last 2 or 3 years to automation, right? So automation as a driver for cost savings, efficiency, whatever the case is. Actually, in Korea is actually, I know people think that Korea is very behind in terms of artificial intelligence, but actually in this particular application, I would say that Korea is probably about pace, maybe slightly ahead of pace in terms of looking at automation opportunities. I would view it actually more almost like from a private equity angle, right? Where you have an existing industry where there's some amount of margin that can be automated, using computer vision or using text processing or classification or summarization. And those workflows can be automated essentially using robotic process automation or machine learning or whatever the case is. And actually in our sector, we compete against Lexis and West and whatnot. These companies actually have, 20,000, 30,000 employees to actually collect information and summarize it. So our argument to the market actually has been that that our industry operates at 55-60% gross margin. Our business operates at 80-85%. Why? Because we were able to automate the biggest chunk of our operating expense using algorithms. So if I were an investment professional, and this is how we think about our M&A transactions, for instance, is we acquire business, we underwrite around automation, and then we essentially look at the cost savings and synergies associated with artificial intelligence. And the other way is which companies have potential for earnings growth, primarily based off of those automated capabilities that they're investing into their organizations.
So I think that just wraps up the time. I want to thank everyone for coming in person. Just a reminder to those of you watching through the webinar, the second part will start soon. Here in South Korea, we're going to do a little mingle, so don't mind us. But thank you again for having us, and it was a pleasure speaking with the team. Thanks so much for making time, and I'm glad that we're able to do it in person, live in Korea, with some semblance of normalcy with live audience here. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. This is Mike Dwanzik. I am, along with Mr. Park, a member of the Shagru Mine firm in Washington, D.C., and I'm coming to you this evening from my home office just outside of Washington. I know we just heard from people in Seoul. First, let me thank KOTRA for inviting Mr. Park and I to join you tonight. It's a pleasure being here and a real treat. We are going to talk for the next bit of time about challenging patents at the U.S. Patent Office. And what I'd like to do to get started is try and pull up a slide deck that we had put together. Hopefully everybody can see this. And let's get this started. Nope, not the right one. All right, sorry about that. We're going to talk tonight about challenging patents at the U.S. Patent Office. Very briefly, we're going to talk about 2 or 3 of the more commonly used, the popular proceedings at the Patent Office, and we will compare that and contrast it to challenging patents in district court, in other words, in our federal district court system. Of course, tonight's presentation is really just for education and for your edification. Obviously, it doesn't constitute legal advice in any way, shape, or form. Okay, the question that really get us started is, why challenge patents? Why do we bother going through the motions or the exercise of asserting that a patent should not have issued or is invalid? Well, very typically, in the course of its business, a company will identify patents owned by others, perhaps competitors, that are relevant to perhaps its own product lines or its methods of conducting business. And they come across those patents in different ways. Sometimes they have a dedicated individual or individuals in-house that actively search worldwide patent databases simply to determine what competitors are doing and to see whether anyone has issued patents that may cover their own products or activities. Oftentimes, a company will engage in a due diligence analysis. For example, when it is considering an acquisition of a product line or a company, or even if it's investigating getting into a new area of research or manufacturing, it will diligence the acquisition or the new business model, and in the course of that work may come across one or more patents that are relevant to their current product line or lines or their current operations. A freedom to operate analysis is a study undertaken when a company wants to see what patent families are relevant to, I'll say, a particular product line or an area of research and development or an area of manufacturing. Before a company prudently gets into or embarks on a new business venture, it studies the IP landscape to see who owns intellectual property in that area that might be relevant to its consideration. And finally, patent prosecution. Companies engaged in obtaining their own patents will frequently learn about a competitive patent during the prosecution of their own patents. Typically, the examiners will bring these patents to light, and oftentimes that's how companies first learn about patents that might be relevant to what they're doing. Probably the least desirable way of finding out about a competitive patent is if a company receives a letter from a competitor or from a patent owner saying, look, we believe that your product or products or one of your methods of manufacturing is covered by our patent, and we want you to stop. This is the kind of notification of a patent that you don't want, which is why companies engage in a sort of proactive searching described on the previous slide. So when you are informed of a competitive patent that's relevant to your activities, the very first question companies seek an answer to is, well, does in fact a product that I am making or a method that I am employing, does it infringe the patent? You know, I see that from my cursory review that the patent's relevant, but now you have to actually undertake a study to see whether or not you infringe. Suppose it's not an existing product, but a product you're planning on launching in the future. How soon or far in the future is that date? And when does the patent expire? It may be the case that if you have a planned product launch for something next year and the patent expires, it may be much less of a concern to you than if the patent is going to expire, you know, in 2030. If you do identify the patent and you undertake an analysis and you determine that your product infringes the claims, the next logical question is there any way to design around the claims? Can I redo my design, change a step in my manufacturing process in a way that avoids the patent? And oftentimes, this is the this can be the least expensive and the least involved way of avoiding that cease and desist letter or avoiding a patent that might otherwise seem relevant. Finally, if you can't design around and you believe that your product may infringe, the question is asked, you have to ask yourself, is it reasonable? Should I take a license under this patent? Should I approach the patent owner and say, look, perhaps I can get a license? And of course, if your activity is licensed, then there's no infringement. So these are the questions that prudent companies typically ask after they've identified a patent before they actually go to the trouble of challenging the patent. But if licensing is not an option and you determine that you infringe, patents can be challenged for their validity. And in the US, there's basically two different forums to do that. In our United States district courts, patents can be challenged, and at the Patent and Trademark Office, in a very different set of proceedings, patent can also be challenged. Just very briefly, the district courts are federal courts in the United States. They are located all over the US in every state, but they adjudicate strictly federal law. And so the law is the same in terms of patent law that is applied regardless of the court in which you find yourself. Let's talk a little bit about district court litigation so you'll understand what the advantages and perhaps disadvantages can be of a patent office challenge. First of all, in district court litigation, patents can be challenged under any recognized legal theory. You're not limited. As we'll see in a minute, under certain patent office proceedings, you can only bring a challenge for lack of novelty or lack of inventive step based on a printed patent or publication. That's somewhat more limited than you could do in district court. In district court, you're also afforded extensive discovery. You can ask the patent owner for all kinds of documents and depositions and evidence supporting either your theory of invalidity or non-infringement. In district court, a patent challenger can seek all sorts of equitable remedies. That is, other than money damages. A challenger can seek a declaration that a patent is unenforceable, or that a patent has been misused and can't be asserted against them. A challenger can seek a declaration that the patent was procured through fraud and therefore is invalid for that reason. In district court, there are no limitations on the number of challenges an infringer or a patent challenger can raise. And finally, I'm going to use a funny word, estoppel. Essentially, in district court, a challenger is not prevented from raising in later subsequent challenges, if there are any specific defenses that it could have been raised in the earlier proceeding. And as we'll see at the patent office, that's not the case. Now, some disadvantages of district court litigation. First of all, a challenger has to have standing to be in court. That means you either have to have been sued or you have to prove you are about to be sued. So you couldn't just upon learning of a competitive patent decide to challenge its validity in district court. In district court, the burden of proving invalidity is much higher than at the patent office. We say in district court, it has to be proven by clear and convincing evidence. We'll find out at the patent office, proving invalidity simply must be proven by a preponderance of the evidence, which means just a little bit more likely than not that it's invalid. In district court litigation, the judges are not technical. They are not scientists. And if you have a jury, you really can bet that they are not scientists. And if you have a difficult challenge, technically, on the merits, you may get a judge or a jury who just doesn't understand the technology. Claim construction. Every patent ends with what we call claims. Claims are one-sentence statements of what the invention is. A patent can have one claim, a patent can have hundreds of claims. Obviously, if a patent has hundreds of claims, there are hundreds of inventions that are included in the patent. Very typically in the patent office and in district court, the question of whether an embodiment infringes or whether a claim is invalid will turn on the interpretation of a phrase or a word. And so both judges in district courts and the patent office will engage in a construction or an interpretation of a disputed claim term. In district court, the way the rules work is you could actually get a narrower construction than at the patent office. And that's a disadvantage if you're a challenger, because the broader the claim is, the easier it is to invalidate. And finally, the time frame. District court cases last much longer than proceedings at the patent office. Other drawbacks of district court challenges: they're expensive. They cost a lot more than PTO proceedings. AIPLA has statistics on how much. They can range from, depending on how much is at stake, from $1 to $10 million. We picked 2.4 as a fairly typical amount, as opposed to a patent office proceeding, which can be undertaken for a few $100,000. Still a lot of money, but much smaller than district court. All right, types of USPTO proceedings. I'm going to talk about inter partes review and post-grant review. Mr. Park will talk about ex parte reexamination. We will not talk about derivation proceedings and protests because they are very seldomly used. And I dropped a footnote just to let you know that there was another proceeding called CBMs, Covered Business Method Challenges, but those expired just a month or two ago on September 16th. So they are not accepting any more petitions for challenges to business method patents. This isn't terribly important, but just to give you a flavor of the way the Patent Office has gone, over the years, they have added more and more proceedings available to challengers to challenge patents. And 30, 40 years ago, we really only had protests at the Patent Office. In 1981, they issued an ex parte reexamination proceeding. They added some more in 1999, and in 2012, they added yet more vehicles for challenging patents. And the reason was because there was a sense over the years that our district courts became overburdened with patent infringement litigation. A lot of the patents were considered to be of questionable value. And so the proceedings instituted in 2012 were really designed to bring patents back to the Patent Office and let the body that issued the patent be the one to evaluate its patentability. And that's common in every country in the world. The US was really the last to get on board with a robust series of proceedings at the Patent Office. Inter partes review is probably the most common, the most popular vehicle for challenging patents at the Patent Office. Really takes what used to be a re-exam and turns it into a mini trial. First, all patents are eligible to be challenged under this proceeding. The challenger is fully involved from day one through the end of the trial. In some of the other proceedings, the challenger submits a petition and then they're done. They're out of it. Here, the challenger participates the entire way. But the scope of the challenge is limited. A challenge in inter partes review can only be made under a lack of novelty, and that's a common feature for patent systems around the world, and obviousness. Elsewhere in the world, that's called inventive step. It's the same concept as our obviousness. Those are the only two grounds for bringing a challenge in an inter partes review. There is a very limited amount of discovery that's permitted at the Patent Office. In district court, it's wide open. Patent Office, much more limited. The trial at the Patent Office is presided over by 3 administrative law judges. There will be a senior judge and 2 junior judges. Under the statute, once a patent is challenged and the board decides to institute the inter partes review, the patent owner has an ability to amend or add claims. However, that's extremely restricted. It's been very seldom granted the ability to do that, but when it is granted, the patent owner can actually amend or add claims in a way that the challenger's prior art doesn't apply anymore. And if the claims are accepted, the IPR challenge, the inter partes review challenge, is terminated. Happily, there is a proceeding is of limited duration. So from the day the proceeding is instituted, a final written decision has to be issued within 12 months. And that's good news for anyone that's ever been in our district court system, where a case can easily go 2.5 years or 3 years to get a final judgment. Since 2012, when inter partes reviews became an officially sanctioned challenge tool, there have been more than 10,000 petitions filed. We're averaging between 1,200 and 1,500 a year. So as you can see, this is a very popular vehicle for patent infringers. Very briefly, this is a timeline of how these proceedings go. A petition will be filed on day 1, and within 3 months, the patent owner files what we call a response. And they don't have to respond on the merits. They can simply respond by saying, the petition is defective. Within 3 months after that, the board makes a decision. Either they institute the review or they don't. If they do, the final decision is due 12 months from the date of the decision on the petition. After a review is instituted, various things happen along the way. Motions are filed, papers are filed, some discovery goes on, and then there's an oral hearing. And at that oral hearing, there's no witnesses. There's just attorneys who stand up and argue the positions of the parties, and then a decision comes out. It's much more streamlined than our district court proceedings. Very briefly, the other proceeding I said I would talk about is post-grant review. Now, this is not a proceeding available for any patent. This review, this challenge is only available for patents whose earliest filing date is on or after March 15th, 2013. So essentially newer patents. I won't get into the reasons why that is, but if a patent's earliest filing date precedes March 15, 2013, post-grant review is not eligible for a challenge. The other limitation on post-grant review is that it must be filed within 9 months after grant. Beyond 9 months, the challenger has to use inter partes review. Before 9 months, post-grant review is available. Interestingly, the challenge can be on any ground of patentability. It's not limited to prior art the way an inter partes review is. So if a challenger wanted to bring a challenge based on sufficiency of disclosure or inadequate description or anything else, it can be done in a post-grant review. Like inter partes reviews, certain discovery is permitted. Trial is presided over by administrative law judges. The patent owner's ability to add or amend claims is restricted, and the duration of the proceeding is fixed. So really, if you're a challenger, whether you bring a PGR, post-grant review, or an IPR is going to depend on when you file and what the basis of your challenge is. This slide is a little bit confusing. I'm going to gloss over it quickly by saying, in the usual case, when a party is sued for patent infringement, oftentimes they consider filing a petition at the patent office pretty soon thereafter for a couple of reasons. First, it's much less expensive and more efficient to adjudicate your invalidity claim at the patent office than in district court. Second, and more important, if the patent office decides to institute your IPR challenge, the district court will stay or essentially stop the litigation and wait for the patent office. And you see the red arrow going up pointing to a stay. And that's a real advantage if you are the patent challenger or the defendant in district court, because then the other issues in the litigation infringement is put on hold, and you essentially go forward with your invalidity challenge at the patent office. You'll get a final written decision within 12 months. And if at any point in time the IPR is settled, well, of course, there's no trial. And very often, a settlement at the patent office will rope in a settlement of the district court action as well. If there's a final written decision that says the patent is invalid or unpatentable, very typically the patent owner will appeal to the next higher court, and that could take another year. So there's a lot of advantages to bringing your validity challenge at the patent office, even though you find yourself in district court. I'll go through this quickly. So the question you have confronting you now that you know about both types of proceedings is, do I challenge in district court or do I go to the patent office? Let's assume, for example, for a second, both are available to you. Well, does the nature of the decision maker make a difference? In the patent office, you've got technical judges whose background maps quite squarely on the patent claims. In district court, you have a lay judge and lay juries who might not understand the technology. Claim construction will generally be broader in the patent office and narrower in the district court, and that favors patent challengers. Evidentiary burdens. Remember we said earlier, there is a lower standard of proof in the patent office than there is in district court. So you have to ask yourself, are the issues so close that the quantum of evidence required would actually make a difference? Nature of evidence required. In the patent office, your evidence is paper only. In district court, of course, you can bring in witnesses. And if your invalidity case needs an expert witness to testify on your behalf, district court might be a better, this factor would favor district court. Discovery opportunities, very limited in the patent office, very broad in district court. Does your invalidity case need a lot of discovery? Because you'll get that in district court, but not at the patent office. I will skip over participation rights because those are the same in both forums. Are the claims fixed or fluid? In the patent office, the patent owner can change the claims. It doesn't happen often, but they can. In district court, they cannot. So the target remains the same. I won't go into the rest of these, but there are differences. As we said, the cost of district court action is much higher than that of the patent office, and the timing, the district court action takes longer than the patent office proceeding. Settlement. Patent office proceedings settle just as frequently as district court proceedings. If there is to be a settlement, it's in your favor as the challenger to do that prior to the final decision, because of estoppel provisions and because of other tactical reasons that might affect your litigation. If a case is settled, it effectively terminates the patent office proceedings, the IPR and the PGR. Settlement has to be in writing, and a settlement, an instituted IPR, frankly, is a credible threat to validity early in litigation, because if the patent office institutes, that means they have found there is a substantial likelihood that at least one claim may be invalid. Well, if you're the patent owner and the patent office has issued that ruling, now you're feeling somewhat vulnerable to the challenge of your claims, both at the patent office and in litigation. And so at the point in time when the PTO decides even to institute one of these proceedings, that can have a very serious and important, a compelling effect on settlement of these proceedings. This is a chart from the Patent Office's own website, and it covers an 8-year period, and it shows institution rates. In the beginning, 13 and 14, the institution rates were pretty high because a lot of the patents brought to them were really of suspect value. But as you can see, the numbers have leveled off somewhat. Still pretty high though, in the 60% range. That means for every 100 petitions for review they're getting, the patent office is instituting review on 60 of them, 63, which is pretty high considering that that is the organization that granted the patent to begin with. This is an institution chart really by technology area. See that in the electrical and computer and business method, they're a little bit higher than they are in bio and pharma. And the reason for that is electrical and business method inventions tend to be based on very predictable technologies, computer software. Bio and pharma is really a more unpredictable technology area. And so it is harder to allege and prove obviousness in an unpredictable art than it is in one that's more predictable. So these numbers aren't really surprising. Whoops. Let's look at outcomes. I'll look through this slide very briefly. Again, this is for an 8-year period from 2012 to 2020. About a third of all cases overall, the Patent Office denied institution. About another third, I'm down here in the purple, settled. For those that went forward, they break the chart up here in various shades of blue. About 21%, there was a final written decision in which all claims were found unpatentable. there was about 7% of the decisions found all claims patentable, and 6% of the decisions, 6% of the cases, there was a final decision that was mixed. In other words, some claims patentable and some claims unpatentable. If you're a challenger, these are some pretty good numbers for you. These are encouraging. Settlements. Just want to focus on the difference between settlement statistics at the patent office before the board institutes, and we're going to compare them to after institution. So before institution, you can see over the years that about 14–15% of cases settle. However, if you look at settlements after institution, the rates go up higher. And the reason for that is quite clear. After the board institutes, the patent owner actually feels somewhat threatened by the board's decision, and they realize their claims are at risk. With that, I will turn over to Mr. Hyung-Suk Park, and I will give him the screen.
Thanks, Mike. Hello, my name is Hyun-Suk Park, and I'm an attorney at Shugro Mayon. Further to Mr. Dwanjik's presentation, I'm going to talk about ex parte re-examination, which is another USPTO proceeding. After introduced in 1981, ex parte re-examination has been used as a proceeding to challenge a patent. In the chart of the slide, you can see that the number of filing of this proceeding has been increased until 2012, but started decreasing since 2013. This drop might be due to the availability of new USPTO proceedings, such as inter partes review, which is also called IPR, and post-grant review, which is also called PGR. And this seems to indicate that IPR and PGR are more attractive proceedings than re-exams. However, the re-exam is still an available option for challenging patent provided by the USPTO, and still a good number of re-exams is filed every year, as seen in the chart. So let's take a look in more detail about the key feature of the re-exam. The first feature is a very unique feature of the re-exam. Different from other USPTO proceedings and district court litigation, the re-exam is the only anonymous mechanism that may be employed at the USPTO to challenge patent. Anonymity can be important, especially when a petitioner does not want to reveal its identity. As discussed at the beginning of the second session, a patent to challenge can be identified by receiving a cease and desist letter from the patent owner. In such a case, the anonymous mechanism might not be beneficial, as a patentee is likely to be able to track down who has started the proceeding. However, the patent to challenge can be also identified by the petitioner in the course of in-house patent search, due diligence, freedom to operate analysis, and even during prosecution, as Mr. Dwanjik explained earlier. Such cases are different from the case where the petitioner received the cease and desist letter from the patent owner, since the patentee might not know yet about the petitioner. Therefore, the re-exam is still an attractive proceeding to challenge the patent if the petitioner especially want to remain anonymous in the proceeding. Another thing to note about the re-exam is that it is the least expensive way of challenging patent. The chart here shows the average cost for the re-exam and IPR. Currently, the USPTO filing fee for the re-exam is about $1,200, but this can be done even at the filing fee of about $6,000 if the petitioner wants to proceed with a streamlined request. The streamlined re-exam request was introduced to make the re-exam filing financially less burdensome for petitioner, requester with limited resources. And the average attorney fees for the re-exam is about $20,000. In contrast, the USPTO filing fee for the IPR is about $19,000 just for filing the petition. And there is also the post-institution fee, about $22,000. And even the average attorney fee for the IPR is over $300,000, which is more than 15 times higher than the average attorney fee for the re-exam. Therefore, definitely there is a great amount of difference between the cost for the re-exam and IPR. And in addition, no legal estoppel is created by the re-exam proceeding. As Mr. Dwanjik explained earlier, estoppel is a legal principle that prevents someone from arguing something that contradicts what they previously said. So no estoppel means technically the petitioner can assert the same argument against the same patent, and thus there will be less pressure in the proceeding. This is different from other USPTO proceedings. For instance, in IPR and PGR, once the petitioner receives a decision, the petitioner is not allowed to challenge the same patent based on the same ground that was already raised during the prior proceeding. In addition, the petitioner is not also allowed to challenge the same patent based on the ground which could have been raised in the prior proceeding. So this could be another benefit in pursuing the re-exam over other USPTO proceedings. And with regard to the ground for challenging patent, in the re-exam, novelty and obviousness ground may be asserted. This is the same as the inter partes review, IPR, but different from post-grant review, PGR, where other grounds such as subject matter eligibility under 35 USC 101 and written description or enablement requirement under 35 USC 112 may also be pursued. This means that if you'd like to argue invalidity based on written description requirement, which is a popular ground for invalidating antibody patent, or based on patent subject matter eligibility, which has been also greatly asserted for diagnosis method patent or software-related patent, then the re-exam cannot be considered as a proceeding to invalidate such patent. Next, processing speed. According to the statistics released by the USPTO December last year, the average pendency of the re-exam, which is between the filing date and the certificate issue date, was about 26 months. This is relatively slower and lengthier as compared to other USPTO proceedings. For instance, in IPR, the institution decision is made within 6 months after filing a petition, and then a final decision is made within a year, which means that the maximum duration is 18 months. So with regard to the processing speed, inter partes review or post-grant review seems to be a more attractive proceeding as compared to the re-exam. But another thing to consider is that the median pendency for the re-exam about 90 months, which is much shorter than the average pendency of about 60-20 months. And 19 months is a period even comparable to 18 months of other proceeding. So the pendency of the re-exam may vary depending on each case. For instance, if you found a prior art reference which teaches each and every limitation of the patent claim, and the determination on novelty issue based on such prior art can be easily made. And let's say that if the patent specification does not provide any reasonable ground for amending the claims to distinguish over such a prior reference, then the pendency of the re-exam could be shorter than the average. And thus, maybe in that case, the period for re-exam could be comparable to 18 months of the IPR or PGR. Therefore, the selection of the proceeding should be made in view of your specific case, as well as the average processing speed of the re-exam and other USPTO proceeding. Next, participation. In terms of ex parte re-examination, ex parte is Latin for from one party. As can be hinted by this name, ex parte re-examination does not allow the third-party petitioner to submit an additional argument in response to the patent owner's argument during the procedure. So if you file a re-exam request to assert invalidity of others' patent, you cannot do more than preparing and filing the initial request for re-exam. And then you have to wait to see how the proceeding goes and is decided. In contrast, in IPR and PGR as well, the petitioner may participate in the procedure and thus may submit a reply in response to the patent owner's argument. Therefore, with regard to the participation issue, definitely the re-exam is a less attractive proceeding as compared to inter partes review or post-grant review. Lastly, let's take a look about the success rate of the procedure. The chart here shows the percentage of cases where all claims, some claims, or even no claims are canceled. As you can see, both of the re-exam and IPR show that no claims have been canceled in about 20% of the cases. So the failure rate for the both proceedings seem to be around 20%. However, in the re-exam, in about 12% of the cases, all claims have been canceled, while in about 66% of the cases, some claims have been changed or canceled. In contrast, in the IPR, in 62% of the cases, all claims have been canceled, and in 18% of the cases, some claims have been changed or canceled. So this appears to indicate that the IPR shows much higher success rate overall. However, in the re-exam, about 90% of the initial request is granted, while in the IPR, about 56% of the initial request is granted, which is called institution in IPR. Since the chart here shows the success rate only for the granted cases, not for the entire cases, if the success rate for the initial request is reflected here, the success rate for the IPR would increase while the success rate for re-exam would increase. In addition, if you just need to invalidate the independent claim, which has the broadest scope among your claim set, the success rate for the re-exam might be comparable to that of the IPR. This is because in the chart, some claims changed or canceled means that at least the independent claims have been canceled or changed, as it is the weakest claim in terms of invalidity based on prior art. Therefore, considering all of the facts discussed, like the IPR, the re-exam is also an attractive proceeding to invalidate patent in terms of the success rate. So thus far, we have discussed various features of the re-exam and compared it with the feature of other USPTO proceedings such as IPR and PGR. As you have seen, there are many aspects of the proceeding to consider in selecting the best course of action for your case, such as anonymity, cause, estoppel, ground for invalidity, processing time, participation, and success rate. And as a last part of the presentation, I prepared 3 different hypothetical fact scenarios, which might be helpful to understand the key features of the proceedings that we discussed earlier. And the first fact scenario is shown in this slide. In this scenario, company X receives a patent cease and desist letter from company Y. An attorney for company X advises that company X has a weak case for asserting invalidity based on novelty and obviousness ground, but has a very strong case for asserting invalidity based on the written description requirement. The patent has been issued 1 year ago. And the question here is, what course of action should company X pursue for invalidating the patent? Maybe let's think about this issue for 20 seconds. So here, my proposed course of action is district court litigation. This is because in this fact scenario, company X has a weak case for asserting invalidity based on novelty and obviousness ground, but has a very strong case for the asserting invalidity based on written description requirement. However, in the re-exam and IPR, the ground for invalidity based on written description is not permitted. Therefore, the remaining procedure here are PGR and district court litigation. These two proceedings allow asserting invalidity based on written description requirement, but PGR can be pursued only within 9 months from the issuance of patent, as we discussed earlier. Therefore, here, the remaining available option is district court litigation. And in a hypothetical fact scenario 2, company X identifies a patent owned by company Y in the course of an in-house patent search. An attorney for company X advises that company X has a strong case for challenging the patent on novelty and obviousness. However, company X does not want to reveal its identity in challenging the patent. So question here is, what course of action should company X pursue for invalidating the patent in this scenario? So let's think about this issue for 20 seconds again. So in this scenario, my proposed course of action is ex parte re-examination. As we have seen earlier, the re-exam is the only anonymous mechanism that may be employed at the USPTO to challenge the patent. Different from the re-exam, a challenger must identify the identity in other USPTO proceeding and also district court litigation. In this scenario, the patent to challenge has been identified in the course of an in-house patent search. And the patentee might not know yet about the company X. And as the ground for challenging invalidity is novelty and obviousness, which is permitted in the re-examination proceeding. And also company X does not wish to reveal its identity. Here, the re-exam may be the reasonable course of action that company X may pursue. And this is the last fact scenario. Here, company X receives a patent cease and desist letter from company Y. An attorney for company X advises that company X has a weak case for challenging the patent on novelty and obviousness, but has a strong case for written description. And the patent has been issued 2 months ago, and company X budget is limited, and company X wishes to receive a decision as soon as possible. So question here is, what course of action should company X pursue for invalidating the patent? So another 20 seconds to think about this case. So in this scenario, my proposed course of action is post-grant review. First of all, here the written description requirement provides a strong ground for invalidating the patent. As we have seen, there are only 2 proceedings which permit written description ground for challenging patent. They are post-grant review and district court litigation. However, another fact to consider is that company X budget is limited, and also company X wishes to receive a decision as soon as possible. As Mr. Dwanjik explained earlier, the USPTO proceeding is a less expensive procedure as compared to the district court litigation. In addition, the maximum duration for the post-grant review is 18 months, which is generally considered to be shorter than the district court litigation. Therefore, PGR seems to be a more attractive proceeding to company X in terms of its processing time and cost. Lastly, in this scenario, the patent has been issued 2 months ago, which satisfies the timing requirement for the PGR, which is within 9 months from the issuance of the patent. Therefore, in this scenario, the PGR may be the reasonable proceeding for company X to change the patent, which is owned by company Y. So this is the end of our presentation. And if you have any question, please feel free to contact me or Mr. Dwanzik. And I speak Korean, so if you are more comfortable speaking or writing in Korean, please do not hesitate to do so. And as a reminder, for the presentation today, a recorded webinar will be posted on KOTRA's and Korea Society's YouTube channel shortly after the event. So if you'd like to watch it again or recommend the webinar to your colleagues or friends, please visit the YouTube channel for this webinar. Thank you for watching and have a good evening.